Cool. We're happy about that. So they have, uh, pretty sure they're not going to find them ever again. They're gone. So even if the works are eventually returned someday, they're lost. They are lost to history. All is lost. The reason I mention this is because of sort of the futility of chasing down an art thief and the idea that, oh, that's just all in the past, may have been all is lost, might have been what the disciples were thinking in that Rembrandt painting and in the lesson for today. All is lost. We have no way of getting beyond this. In literature, there is a trope called all is lost moment, a scenario that is so devastating and to such a complete stopping point that the main character recognizes that everything is over. They're defeated. They are done. It's a dramatic and engaging method of storytelling because it's a pretty universal experience. At some point in time in all of our lives, we have been confronted by something that makes us realize we're not going any further, and what has come behind us is gone. It's completely over with. Now remember, the Gospel of Mark was likely written during or just after a period of very intense, almost unimaginable upheaval for the Jews in the first century, near the year 70 CE. They had revolted against the Roman occupation one more time, but this time it was a big one, and this time Rome was like, no, no, we are sick of this. We are not going to let you do this anymore. And Rome's empire came crashing down on them, desecrating, destroying the temple in Jerusalem, which is to say, from the Jewish point of view, desecrating and destroying the heart of the world. Their world had come to an end. To put it very mildly, the atmosphere of Mark's world was full of fear, grief, lamentation, and dread. Death-dealing forces were swirling through everyday life, very much like a chaotic storm at sea. So Mark tells this story of catastrophe, near catastrophe, with three elements, and I'm borrowing very heavily today from the work of a man named Richard Debert, who wrote about the Gospel of Mark in the Interpretation Bible Studies series. The first element that he has identified in this story is the storm itself. Now, this is not just a typical intense weather system that blows up over the Sea of Galilee. Many people who have worked on these particular stories have said, yeah, the Sea of Galilee, it's in a bowl and the wind comes up and it can get pretty rocky. This is more than that. And Mark uses words that tell us this is not just a bad day on the water. This story is not about the weather at all. In Greek, the word lelaps is never just a single gust or a steady blowing wind, however violent it might be, but a lelaps is a storm that breaks forth from black thunder clouds and furious gusts with floods of rain, throwing everything topsy-turvy. If you are in any way susceptible to seasickness, this story should be making you nauseous. It is up and down and over and under, and we have no idea where it came from nor how long it's going to last. There is no meteorological source for this storm in Mark's Gospel. Debert says this is an awful primordial eruption of evil, and we are smack in the middle of it. Mark will not allow us to attenuate its force. He will not permit us to sidestep the concrete threat to Jesus and the disciples. Now, I read that part of the story this morning from the contemporary English version, which says waves started splashing into the boat. And if you've ever been in a boat, waves have been splashing into the boat, that's not fun. Your feet get wet, stuff in the boat gets wet. If there's a lot of waves, you might have to do a little bailing. No. The New Revised Standard Version interprets that verse as the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. This isn't just whoop, it's wah, boom, wah, boom. The waves are crashing down on them with the power of battering rams. Yeah, they're sinking. So Diebert suggests that this is more than just weather. And if that is the case, what is the storm representing in this story? Well, as we start out in this particular story, the disciples and Jesus are going to the other side of the lake, the east side of the lake, which is a foreign land. It's where the Decapolis is, the 10 cities. So, being faithful, observant Jews, they're leaving their land for people that they don't know. People for whom they might have some preconceived notions. People that are different from them. They're heading there. Maybe their worry and their concern about stepping outside safe boundaries is an opening for chaos. Maybe the maelstrom around them is an outward experience of their own inner storms, their own inner turmoil. Where does Jesus want us to go? Why are we going there? So maybe the evil that is always looking for a way to pull people apart from one another, to scare the daylights out of us and make us stop doing good, sees an opening. Oh yeah, those 12 guys are really upset about going over the Decapolis. Let's make them see how their fear looks. Maybe that's what it is. An evil manifestation of their own inner turmoil. If it's not actually just meteorological, there may be something to that. So the first element in the story is the storm. Big one, threatening one, possibly with a sinister source. The second element is Jesus, who, as the story begins, is sound asleep. Now, that's not too surprising if we consider the day that he's had. He's out. It was a long day. Now, some people have what's called sea legs, and they're mostly immune to the feel of a boat on water. They just kind of flow with it. They go with it. David and I, when we went on our honeymoon, we had the opportunity to do a carnival cruise on the good ship Fantasy. And it's big enough. I mean, those boats are huge. They're floating cities. And you never feel the motion of the water unless the seas get really high. And then it's kind of just sort of a gentle rocking. And we only ever felt the motion of the boat at dinner, which was weird. We'd be sitting there and the boat would move and I'd go this way and he'd go that way. At the same time, we just kind of went like this. I don't know how that worked, but it did. And the other time that I felt the boat rocking was at night, just before falling asleep. It was like being in a cradle. It was like, oh, the boat. I'm out. So when we get to this point in the story, where the boat is being beat up by a maelstrom, a sinister storm, Jesus is asleep. And we kind of tend to go past this story pretty quickly because this is a little troubling. We either chalk up his deep sleep to a bone-weary fatigue of a person who has worked a whole week in a single day, which is relatable. We all understand that kind of fatigue. Or there's kind of this uneasiness. There's an interpretation that suggests Jesus was testing their faith. He wasn't really asleep. He was pretending to be asleep to see how long it would take them to call on him. Now, if that's the case, couldn't he find a less threatening way to test their faith? I don't think that's the case. But what these attempts to explain away Jesus sleeping glosses over something very vital. Again, Richard Diebert says, the only adequate explanation for Jesus' sleep is that he is utterly fearless over the prospect of dying. Jesus can sleep in this moment because he suffers no anxiety over death. He sleeps the sleep of a faithful Jew who entrusts his future entirely to the Lord. It's entirely possible that Jesus was thinking of the words of David after David had fled his son Absalom in Psalm 3, verses 5 through 6. This is from the NRSV. I lie down and sleep. I wake again, for the Lord sustains me. I am not afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. His ancestor David had complete and utter confidence in God. Jesus also has complete and utter confidence in God. Jesus is steeped in the knowledge and assurance of God, trusting God's covenant, and he sleeps knowing everyone in that boat is safely enfolded in the hands of Israel's God, who will be true to the promises that God has made to be with them even unto death. So the first element is the storm. The second element is Jesus peacefully and calmly and deeply sleeping through it. And the third element is the relationship between Jesus and the 12. Mark, in the choice of Greek words that he uses to talk about this storm, makes clear that the storm is a killer. Have any of you seen the movie A Perfect Storm with George Clooney and who has Mark Wahlberg? And it's a story about fishermen and on the out of Massachusetts, out of Boston, that got caught up in a perfect storm, which is a meteorological phenomena where weather from the south, I think it's from the south, the north, and the east all converge in one spot. And all of these things are coming in hot and heavy, and they created massive, massive seas. And there's a scene in the movie, the boat was lost, and all the crew was lost. It's a historical story. But there's a point in the movie, just gives me chills thinking about it even now. It's CGI, where this monster wave is cresting up like this, and this little tiny fishing boat is going up the front of it, and it gets to perpendicular and falls off of it. I remember watching that. We were watching it at home, and I was sitting on the couch, and I was gasping at the horror of that. Oh my gosh. So this is the kind of storm. It's a killer storm, and Jesus is sleeping through it, and the disciples wake him and say, "Don't you care?" And if we're honest, all of us have asked God that question at one point in our lives. Everyone's circumstances differ, but we've all been in a place where we feel pounded on, beaten by forces that seem to want to trip us up, rip us apart, make us fall, make us feel abandoned by God. Because that is the point and the best trick in the adversary's playbook. We may be able to withstand temptations that draw our attention away, and if we are drawn away, we come back and we confess the ways that we've gone astray, and we are welcomed home. But it takes a very strong soul not to feel the gut-wrenching loss of abandonment. And it's at that point that Jesus wakes up, sees what's going on, and he commands the storm to cease, asserting his authority over it like a trainer handling a dog that has gotten unruly. Sit, heel, stay. That easy. Then he turns to his disciples and he says, "Why do you not have the confidence to trust God? God's got you." And notice, the only thing that Jesus tells to calm down are the waves, and the only thing literally rebuked is the wind. He does not rebuke his disciples for not trusting enough. He's just seriously curious. Why don't you trust him enough? Where's your faith? And this point is where Mark uses Greek words to great effect. He writes, I'm going to try this, kai ephobeithos phobon megan. In other words, literally, and they feared a great fear. Everything's calm. The threat is gone, and they're terrified. A man who, to the best of his, this is kind of like a movie. I don't know the name of it. I can't remember the name of it. But it's like about a movie. A man who, to the best of his family's knowledge, was just a typical insurance salesman in Indiana. But in reality, he was a highly trained government spy who spoke half a dozen languages fluently, could wield weapons with the best of them, and knew all kinds of tricks of the spy trade. In this film, the man's wife disappears in Paris. And so he's trying to find her. I don't think it's taken, it's something else. But early on in the movie, this man is out on the street in a payphone, and his son is standing outside the payphone, and he overhears his father speaking fluent French as he's very slickly tucking a pistol into his waistband. So he comes out of the phone booth, and his son, standing there, eyes as big as saucers, says, "Who are you?" The disciples, now standing in a calm boat on a glassy sea, look at Jesus and they wonder aloud, "Who is this?" The powers of chaos obey him. He is the presence of God. It is what we all want, and yet what terrifies us. Because we want the presence of God on our terms. It's one thing to think you've hitched your wagon to a highly charismatic teacher and healer, and it's one thing to think you're inside the circle of a gifted human being. Yay, we're part of the elite. Woohoo, we're moving, we're going places. But how different must it feel to realize this man is so much more than they had originally thought. They find themselves in the presence of God on God's terms. And it may be at that moment that they wonder if they've made a mistake following this guy. What is made clear by this story is not only that Jesus has control over chaos, any kind of chaos, but that Jesus is fully understood by what he does. Jesus heals, Jesus forgives, Jesus reorients our thinking and caring, and Jesus liberates. Mark tells a kind of story writ large, a liberation story writ large. Elizabeth Meyer at SALT says that this has two implications. First, the story suggests that the world's death-dealing forces aren't limited to just an individual. They are also larger, interpersonal, communal phenomena, more like enveloping storms. And this story suggests that the essence of Jesus' mission is to confront those forces, not with military might, but with a calm, courageous campaign of healing and freedom. The story is the entirety of Jesus' good news in one short segment of 6 verses. We have powerful opposition. We have fear and doubt. And we have Jesus' serene confidence that leads to a very calm triumph on that third day when he emerges from the tomb and says, it worked. Suzanne Guthrie at the edge of the enclosure says that Pentecost teaches me Christ is enthroned, not far away in heaven, but in my heart. I'm called to draw upon resources within myself to find Christ there, stilling the storm from within while I cope with the dangers that surround me. Friends, we do have storms of faith. both as individuals and as the body of Christ and as a larger society. Mark highlights the fragility of life, but also clearly witnesses to the fact that creation holds within it no chaos strong enough to overcome the reordering power of the Creator. The Creator made this. Chaos says, ha, let's mess it up. And God says, no. Mark's world was full of fear, disorientation, lament. In its own way, so is ours. Yet, and this is the good news, yet, the one who is with us, who is sleeping with full confidence of God's authority, the one who cedes full control to God's benevolent presence, is with us in the boat. Rembrandt has the disciples in various stages of, one person is even leaning over the edge, being ill. And sometimes we find ourselves in a similar situation. And I think, I know, I trust that Jesus cares very, very much that we are in peril. But he also cares very much that we learn to be as confident of God's trust, God's benevolence, God's presence as he is. It may take a lot of trial, a lot of experience to be able to sleep through a crisis. And maybe we really shouldn't. You shouldn't sleep through your house being on fire. But maybe the chaos that's out there is something that God knows exists and God ultimately handles. Isaiah 45:18. For the Lord is God, and God created the heavens and earth and put everything in place. God made the world to be lived in, not to be a place of empty chaos. I am the Lord, God says. There is no other. Thanks be to God. Hallelujah and